There were no trumpets, no thunder, no dramatic declaration that the world as it knew it had just shifted. Just a blessing, just a crown. Just two words from an archbishop that landed across the realm like the closing of one chapter and the turning of another. And by nightfall, the monarchy that Britain had known for decades no longer existed. Something quieter, steadier, and altogether more powerful had taken its place. History rarely announces itself. The moments that truly reshape institutions, that redirect the course of centuries-old traditions, rarely arrive with fanfare. They arrive quietly, in the middle of a ceremony that everyone thinks they understand, in a gesture witnessed by thousands that only a handful fully grasp. This was one of those moments. William and Catherine, until now the heirs, the future, the promise held carefully in reserve, stepped into something different. Not with a coronation, not with a formal transfer power announced in measured parliamentary language, with a blessing, a crown, and a walk through Windsor's streets that told the watching world everything the palace hadn't yet said aloud. Today, we tell the complete story of what happened inside Westminster's ancient arches, of what shifted inside Buckingham Palace in the hours and days that followed, of the woman whose absence spoke as loudly as any statement, and of the quiet, deliberate, unstoppable momentum of a monarchy finding its footing for a new era. The Archbishop of Canterbury had stood beneath those same arches just 2 years earlier to crown King Charles III. The words spoken then were ancient, ceremonial, carrying the accumulated authority of every coronation that had preceded it back through the centuries. The words spoken this time were different, simpler, and in their simplicity, more powerful. The crown, the Archbishop said, was not merely an inheritance. It was a duty, and it was now passing to people who were prepared to hold it. The realm understood immediately, not as constitutional scholars parsing legal language, but as people who had been watching, waiting, and wondering when the transition they had sensed coming would finally take visible shape. And then, Princess Anne, moving with the composed authority that has defined her public life for 6 decades, holding a newly commissioned queen consort's crown, crafted by Gerard and Company, royal jewelers since 1735, set with Burmese rubies, sapphires, and diamonds from Queen Elizabeth II's personal collection, not spectacle. Continuity, for a brief moment, as Catherine wore that lighter crown beneath Westminster's ancient arches and London's bells rang out, something in the nation's perception shifted. Observers noted her expression, serene, still, carrying something visible in the set of her shoulders and the steadiness of her gaze. She was not receiving a symbol, she was accepting a weight. Windsor's streets were full. Thousands of people who had come not because they were summoned, not because ceremony required it, but because they sensed that something worth witnessing was happening. And they wanted to be present for it. Handmade badges reading "For the Future," William and Catherine. Flowers pressed into waiting hands. Children holding out folded notes. An elderly veteran leaning forward through the crowd to murmur two words, "God bless the new queen." Her response was immediate, unhesitating. "God bless the king." 4 words. And in them, the entire philosophy of the transition made audible. Not a replacement, not a rivalry, a continuation, a relay, willingly accepted, faithfully carried forward. William moved through the crowd with the particular combination of warmth and restraint that has always defined his public presence. A man who genuinely wants to be there, and who understands, perhaps better than anyone, the cost of appearing not to. Catherine, in a dove gray coat and the lighter ceremonial crown, greeted people with a calm assurance that required no announcement and no explanation. She was simply present, fully, without performance. And the crowd felt the difference. One image dominated international coverage by nightfall, Catherine bowing to Princess Anne at the moment of the crown's presentation. CNN called it the defining royal image of the decade. It was not choreographed humility. It was genuine acknowledgement, a younger woman recognizing the older woman's role in making this moment possible. The guardian and the heir. The institution and its future. Both, for one moment, visible in a single frame. William stopped at the King Charles III Memorial Oak as darkness fell. He placed a child's bouquet at its foot. Quietly, without announcement, loyalty and leadership in one unhurried gesture. What had seemed ceremonial to the watching public felt considerably different inside the palace walls. The images from Westminster, Princess Anne placing the crown, Catherine receiving it with that expression of contained gravity, were being examined not as symbols but as signals. Queen Camilla's absence had not gone unnoticed. Official statements described her withdrawal to Raymil House as private reflection, a choice to support King Charles at Sandringham from a respectful distance. And perhaps that framing was partially true. But those within her immediate circle suggested something more complex was unfolding. A confidant described her watching the Westminster service from Raymil, moved by Princess Anne's words, shaken by what the ceremony had made structurally visible. Without her, history was being written. Within 48 hours, the palace's operational structure began quietly changing. Royal Communications reporting lines were restructured. Teams that had previously operated across both Clarence House and Buckingham Palace were now working directly under the Prince and Princess of Wales's office. Experienced royal observers described the shift carefully, and then, when pressed, described it more plainly. A constitutional earthquake. Fiona Shelburne, Camilla's private secretary, resigned, citing reorganization. Staff who had supported Clarence House were transferred to Kensington. The ground, as one former aide described it, was moving beneath everyone's feet. And through all of it, Princess Anne remained the constant. 2 visits to Sandringham that week. Information carried. Unity reaffirmed. A source recounted what she had reportedly told the king during one of those conversations. Charles, rest, they're ready. In royal circles, those 3 words traveled fast. When asked publicly whether the changes were permanent, Anne's answer was characteristically direct. The crown favors courage over comfort. It dominated the news cycle for days. It was at Sandringham that the transition became impossible to deny. Afternoon light across the Norfolk grounds, white roses lining the walkway, church bells sounding quietly in the distance, and 2 figures, William and Catherine in modest navy, walking a path that Queen Elizabeth II had once known. No ceremonial vehicle, no grand flourish, just 2 people walking toward the volunteers who had helped maintain the estate during the king's health retreat. Genuine smiles, unhurried pauses, the specific quality of leaders who are not performing presence but actually present. Catherine stopped beside an elderly gardener who had tended those grounds for nearly 50 years. She went to her knees beside him. He pressed a small bunch of white flowers into her hands and whispered prayers for the king. "He feels your prayers every day," she said softly, holding his hand. William, nearby, told a group of young scouts something that was not scripted and not for cameras. The best service is the kind done when no one's watching. Inside the main hall, Princess Anne raised a glass at a private reception. Her words were brief, and they were everything. The crown is not a gift, it's a relay. Catherine, later that evening, acknowledged what Anne's quiet, unwavering leadership had meant during the transition. She had kept them steady. And as dusk fell over Sandringham, Catherine at a round table with Commonwealth Secretariat members, discussing sustainability and education and a monarchy built on presence rather than pageant. Sky News used a phrase that the palace had not issued and could not have planned: the moral compass of the monarchy. The historians will argue about when precisely the shift occurred. Some will point to the blessing, others to the crown, others to the restructured communications lines, where the Sandringham walkabout, where the round table held as dusk settled over Norfolk. But those who were watching closely, who understood the particular language of institutions in transition, knew that the shift had not happened in any single moment. It had been happening for years. In every quiet cancellation of a royal engagement to sit with a sick child, in every unannounced visit to a hospice where no cameras were invited, in every handwritten note to a volunteer, every floor-level conversation with an elderly gardener, every moment of genuine presence in a world that has learned to be suspicious of performance. William and Catherine had not seized power. They had simply kept showing up. For King Charles, this moment carries the particular bittersweet weight of a parent watching their child step into something they spent a lifetime preparing for. A source described a private exchange in which Charles reportedly said simply, "Let her shine. Your mother would have wanted that." More was contained in that sentence than anyone who heard it could immediately articulate. For Princess Anne, the relay she had spent decades quietly ensuring was in safe hands had finally, visibly, been passed. And for William and Catherine, the future they had prepared for, the weight they had accepted, the duty they had chosen long before any crown was placed, had arrived. the monarchy the world had known was quietly transforming, not because of scandal, not because of crisis, not because an institution had been forced to change, but because two people had shown up consistently, genuinely, without announcement, and the world had noticed. The biggest changes in history rarely come with trumpets. They come with a quiet walk down a familiar path, a hand held in a garden, a crown accepted with steady eyes. They come like this: a blessing that became a transfer, a crown that carried centuries of meaning and one woman's quiet resolve, and a monarchy discovering, in the most human of ways, that the future had already arrived. The question is no longer whether change is coming, it's already here, walking through Sandringham, sitting with an elderly gardener, saying, without ceremony, without announcement, "We are ready." If this story moved you, share it with someone who needed to hear it today. Don't forget to subscribe for more cinematic journeys like this one. Hit the like button and share with friends who believe that the most powerful moments in history are often the quietest ones. Because the crown doesn't always announce itself, sometimes it simply arrives.